March Madness is here and not a moment too soon. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, new numbers suggest that enrollment in Obamacare is lagging. The president goes on a show called Between Two Ferns to pitch insurance to young invincibles who so far don't seem to be buying. Meanwhile, the crisis in the Ukraine intensified. A Malaysian airliner went missing, completely missing. The state legislature finishes with a flourish of votes approving an overhaul of Milwaukee's mental health system and an end to early voting on weekends. Former Common Council President Willie Hines finds himself out of a job, at least for now, after the feds refused to give him a required waiver from conflict of interest rules. This may make Willie Hines the only Democrat in America not to get a waiver from the Obama administration. And Miley Cyrus came to Milwaukee. Western civilization remained intact, more or less. But we start with a debate over early voting. The state Senate last week passed a bill that would set uniform statewide times for early in-person voting. In the old days, you might remember this, you had to show up on Election Day, but now people can vote in person for 2 weeks before an election up to the Friday before Election Day. In Milwaukee and Madison, that has included weekend voting, Saturdays and Sundays, days when the polls are closed in most of the rest of the state. The new legislation will limit early voting hours to the hours of 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. Supporters say it levels the playing field and treats all voters alike. Opponents charge that it was all part of a plan to suppress the urban and minority vote. Now, joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Mikel Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litjens, blogger Alex Runner, and Milwaukee County Supervisor Deanna Alexander. So your reaction to this, Mikel Holt?
Nobody has yet to tell me why we really going to do this. Why are we going to do this? It levels the playing field. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You know, Milwaukee is a first-class city. We have 600,000 people. There are elderly people. You know, I was going to Rufus King. It takes an elderly person almost 30 minutes to navigate and go all the way around these corners. At least providing this early voting allowed them access.
Are there elderly people in Waukesha and Port Washington?
You know, Milwaukee, you talk about level of playing fields. Milwaukee has ordinances and laws that other communities do not have. You know, our liquor stores close at 9 o'clock. What about the rest of the state?
Okay, Michelle Litjens.
I think this was definitely required. We need to set standards for all municipalities. I live in a township where you could argue that the farmers work 14-hour days all week long, and it's difficult for them to get to the polls, but we have a part-time clerk. So if you're not able to make it to the polls on Election Day or during the hours that they're prescribing now, you always have that opportunity to vote by an absentee ballot.
All right, Alex Runner.
Yeah, I'm with Michael. It doesn't make any. We want to put this rural or suburban template on the city. You know, volunteer fire departments don't work for the city. So we have 600,000 people, hundreds of thousands more people. It takes longer.
We've always had, okay, but this is not a new idea. We've always had Election Day. You could make the same argument that having an Election Day that goes from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. suppresses the vote of people who can't get there till 8:15, and yet this has never been an issue. Is there any person in the state of Wisconsin who will not be able to vote? If you can't make it from 8 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night, there is still the mail-in absentee ballot. Nobody's right to vote has been restricted in any way whatsoever. So what is this debate about, Deanna Alexander?
I agree that no right to vote is being restricted here, but I do think that they have good intentions with trying to make everything equal across the state. But I think that it might be a little bit better if we could go a direction where we let the municipalities have a certain number of hours and let each municipality choose which days and times those are going to be. Then everybody has an equal amount of time set to the municipality's
I mean,
needs.
this is a fundamental constitutional right to vote. Shouldn't you...
Early voting in person.
Any way you can get a person to exercise his democratic right to vote.
Let me ask you this. I would take that argument more seriously if you were concerned about the suppression of the vote in 90% of the rest of the state where you can't vote on Saturdays and Sundays.
Well, allow them. Let the state give them money.
Okay.
They waste the money and everything else.
You know what else I think we need to talk about when you're talking about expanding the hours that people can vote? What about the integrity of the voter? What about requiring these people to show a photo ID and show who they are? I think we could actually have this conversation.
You already handled that. That's in the court.
It's still in the courts right now. But if the other side would come forward and say, we want to make sure we preserve the integrity of the system.
That's what this is about.
You know, then we could maybe talk about expanding.
Give us voter ID and we can allow people to vote.
Well, no, here's my question, because I know exactly what you guys would say if in fact In Waukesha, they had 2 election days, where there was 1 election day in Milwaukee or Madison. If you turned on television and you saw people going to the polls in Ozaukee County and Waukesha County a week before people in Milwaukee County going to vote on days when nobody in Milwaukee County, you'd go, whoa, what is that about? What kind of a Jim Crow system is that? How about evening the playing field?
Right,
Why is it any different?
Instead of the state meddling, allow Milwaukee to do what Milwaukee wants to do.
Except we do have state election laws which have been uniform. I mean, it seems like 5 minutes ago that we had election days, 1 election day, and we didn't hear the screams that it was a voter suppression plan, that you had to vote on the first Tuesday after the first Monday during these hours. And now we get all of this, wailing of the hands and playing of the race card and everything, because you can vote anytime in 2 weeks before the election.
And in the rest of the world, around the entire world, very few countries offer you an opportunity to vote any other day other than Election Day.
Yeah, like the Congo.
We need to keep that priority.
We should be just like the Congo.
Okay,
France.
What has your glass half full and what has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
My glass is half full because 2 major statewide surveys have confirmed that the overwhelming majority of Wisconsinites support increasing the minimum wage. Well, my glass is half empty because state politicians with the power to impact poverty have turned a deaf ear to the cries of the working poor.
Michelle Litjens.
My glass is half empty because only 17% of the millennial voters identify themselves as Republicans. My glass is half full because 27% of millennial voters identify themselves as Democrats, which is down substantially from 2012. That means the GOP has some real opportunities to gain voters if they don't mess it up.
Alex Runner.
My glass is half full because some Republicans, like Congressman Paul Ryan, are showing sincere interest in what ails our Central City neighborhoods. I applaud the congressman for caring about this important issue. But my glass is half empty because some people still keep trying to oversimplify the complex reasons behind systemic poverty. It's not as easy as people don't want to work. Most people do.
Deanna Alexander.
My glass is half empty because powerful conservative leaders and media pundits are blasting libertarian-minded Senator Rand Paul as being juvenile for favoring non-interventionist foreign policy. But my glass is half full because Rand Paul was the landslide winner of the presidential straw poll at the Conservative Political Action Conference, and he's gaining steam as the candidate that is most interested in preserving American liberty.
Well, my glass is half empty because Marquette won't be taking a trip to the NCAA tournament, but it is half full because the UWM Panthers are going to the dance for the first time in 7 years. Congratulations. Next on Sunday Insight, the complicated questions in a deadly shooting in Milwaukee. Was it self-defense or a double homicide? Was it in self-defense or was it intentional homicide or was it something else? The shooting deaths of 2 teenagers could become a flashpoint over race, guns, and self-defense. According to law enforcement sources, a 39-year-old maintenance man was attacked by 3 assailants. While one of the attackers held him in a bear hug, another beat him with a baseball bat. The man drew a handgun and shot 2 and killed 2 of his attackers, both teenagers. Sources tell me that he had a valid CCW permit for the gun, concealed carry. The lone surviving attacker now faces felony battery charges, but the beating victim was also jailed, facing possible intentional homicide charges. They were released on Friday. Complicating the case, the beating victim and the shooter was white. The 2 victims were black. So let's talk about this. Does this have the potential of becoming a Milwaukee version of the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case?
I don't think so. And I think, if you're going to beat someone with a baseball bat, you're sort of taking your own life in your own hands. You're making a really criminal decision. It ended tragically. It's interesting you mentioned victims. In one sense, everyone is a victim. I mean that in that 2 people died and 1 person got beaten. It's tragic all the way around. None of us were there. We don't know exactly what happened. But I think if you're going to beat someone with a baseball bat, you got to be open to the fact that they might fight against you.
Deanna Alexander.
That's sort of the route I would go, is that they were right to jail him, but only if they can prove that, there was some kind of dual input to the altercation here. But really, I'm hoping that he's going to be released if this was an attack on him. I'm hoping that his rights aren't violated, and I'm hoping that they get to the bottom of this. It does not get drawn out forever.
Okay, obviously this is going to raise the issue of concealed carry and the use of handguns for self-defense. It's been a political hot button issue. How do you think this is going to play out, Michael Holt?
Well, and I support concealed carry.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he always has, yeah.
Yeah, I always have.
He's packing right now, just so you know. Yeah.
That's not what I'm packing. I moderated a political forum on Thursday, and there was about 150 people there, Democrats for Education Reform, automatic, your old district. And so I quizzed people there, including ministers, and everybody I talked to said, without knowing all the facts, it was self-defense, it was clear self-defense. I would venture to guess somebody is going to start a discussion, particularly given the fact that Trayvon Martin's mother was in Milwaukee Friday. Somebody is going to ignite this match and make it racial. But fundamentally, this is why they created concealed carry, so people would have the ability to defend themselves. And as you said, you know, once you start beating on somebody with a baseball bat, you have to assume they're going to try to fight back.
Were you surprised by the fact that the police, after the police chief went out and talked about this was an act of self-defense, that later that day they did arrest and book the individual, and he did spend a couple of nights in jail.
And then I was not surprised, because that was purely political. They're really afraid, the chief is, the administration, the mayor, everybody's afraid that this could erupt into a Trayvon Martin type scenario. So they wanted to look as if they were taking a step. And plus, the chief is opposed to concealed carry.
Okay.
Well, and I think that's the exact issue that people are going to be talking about now. Can you be held for a few days before you're charged?
Oh, sure.
Especially when the perception is that he was acting in self-defense, and are people going to be concerned about acting in their own self-defense in the future because they might be held indefinitely and not be charged with a crime? I think that's something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting how reluctant. I did talk to the police chief on my radio show on Friday, who said under the law he was not, permitted. The police department cannot confirm whether he has a valid concealed carry permit. He does. But obviously, I'm thinking that this could become the political hot potato, because if it was not a good, clean shooting, self-defense shooting, they would be all over this, and this would become Exhibit A against the concealed carry. Now, you may not want to hear it. We're going to tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you're first.
Whatever agencies are supposedly coming up with plans to stop the invasion of those whale-sized jumping Asian carp better get on the stick, because they recently found some of their eggs a couple of 100 miles south of Lake Michigan. This isn't a Japanese monster movie, folks. This is real.
Michelle Litjens.
Millennial voters are non-church goers and are far less patriotic than their previous generations. So Republicans need to learn and listen. We don't need to change our beliefs, but we need to focus on what we have in common with millennials, like our distrust of government and libertarian views, and emphasize our similarities so we can bring them over to the Republican ticket this fall.
Alex Runner.
My unsolicited advice is for Governor Walker. Governor, please veto the legislation that we just talked about that restricts early voting. All this bill will do is prevent law-abiding citizens from being able to cast their votes. Urban areas have hundreds of thousands of more people, and they should be able to set up local policies that accommodate that reality.
Deanna Alexander.
My unsolicited advice is for Jennifer Epps Addison, the Executive Director of Wisconsin Jobs Now. The next time that you try to lambaste state officials for making policies that affect Milwaukee while representing other areas, let them and your 99% protesters know that you yourself lead an upscale life in Menominee Falls.
Well, my advice is for former Milwaukee Common Council President Willie Hines. The next time you quit your job, you should probably make sure you can have the new one. Otherwise, it's kind of awkward. Next on Sunday Insight, he accomplished a lot while he was county executive, but what will Tom Ament be most remembered for? Former Milwaukee County Executive Tom Ament passed away last week at the age of 76. The longtime county leader was remembered for his years of service, but inevitably also for the way that his political career ended, destroyed by a massive pension scandal that forced his resignation, led to the recall of other county supervisors, and paved the way for the rise of Scott Walker as his successor. So looking back, what do we remember about Tom Ament? What was his most important legacy, Deanna Alexander, because you still live with that as a county supervisor?
I do. I've been working in the courthouse for 2 years now, and I don't think a week has gone by when we haven't heard about the pension scandal. But the past week since his passing, talking about him more as a person, most people, I'm glad to say, are speaking positively about him and the things he did right.
But what is the legacy that Milwaukee County should remember from that experience, Alex Runner?
Yeah, I think hubris or not being accountable to voters. I mean, the fact that I don't know who it was. Some say Tom Ament didn't really know what was going on. He should have known what was going on. And with millions of dollars in backdrops, I think me as a bus rider, I think Deanna as a supervisor, we're all missing out.
Michelle.
Tom Ament will always be remembered for giving the state Scott Walker. And also the pension scandal, I think, also helped inspire pursuing Act 10.
Okay.
But you know, at the same time, he was a politician's politician. He was working at Brewer State and the Art Museum. There's a lot of things he brought to the table. One of the things somebody reminded me of, he had the largest percentage of black cabinet members of any major politician before or since. He had more than the mayor and more than the county exec does now.
I think there are several very, very important legacies. Number one, that story should remind us why it is important to hold the politicians' feet to the fire, why they need to be held accountable. Because what happened was the public lost interest, the media was not covering, and you know what conscience is, that little small voice telling you somebody may be looking. Nobody was watching what was going on in county government, and the politicians stuffed the cash in their pocket. Number two, I think one of the major legacies of all of that was, in fact, this grassroots movement which exploded in the wake of the pension scandal. This was the first time in years that you had average rank-and-file grassroots people come out and say, you know what, we're mad as hell, we're not going to take it anymore. And you know, that may have set the stage for a lot of activism that we've seen in Wisconsin since then. So there's no question about those two things. And the second thing is to remember, you know, that unfortunately we have too many people in government who continue to think that government exists for the benefit of them and their friends. And the first thing they think about is, how can I benefit, what can I get out of government, before they think about the service that provided. And I think that's been one of the chronic diseases in Milwaukee County government. The Milwaukee County government, or bureaucracies like MPS, operate for the benefit of the insiders, you know, the perks, the privilege, and the power of the insiders. And frankly, there was a real culture that developed there, and hopefully we've learned a lesson. I'm skeptical. Is what they said this week the same thing as what you heard? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
Well, let's go back a couple of segments. Republican lawmakers said their legislation restricting early voting is intended to level the playing field between urban and rural communities. What I heard was an insultingly dumb excuse to slow the opposition vote.
Michelle Litjens.
Well, this week, Democrat Senator Tim Carpenter yelled on the floor of the Senate that Republican Senator Mary Lozick hates blacks and Latinos. What I heard was another Democrat who couldn't win an argument on its merits, so following the Democrat playbook, he went for the personal attack.
Alex Runner.
This week, two Tea Party darlings, Senator Rand Paul and Senator Ted Cruz, went at each other. What Senator Paul said was that politicians like Cruz like to beat their chests about going to war, but real leadership, like in the case of Ronald Reagan, often means avoiding military action. What I heard is that Rand Paul does not have much respect for Cruz's warmongering.
Deanna Alexander.
Referring to people signing up for Obamacare, this week our president said they might end up having to switch doctors. What I heard was, if you like your doctor, you might end up having to switch doctors, period.
Well, last week, California Senator Dianne Feinstein said the CIA had spied on Senate staffers, and she said she was outraged. What I heard, Feinstein is an ardent defender of the surveillance state and thinks it's completely okay to spy on little people, but she was outraged when they spy on her. Senators are not little people. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. First, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
My buddy's former boss. The loser, former Common Council President Willie Hines, who gave up his seat to accept a high-ranking position with the Housing Authority, only to learn federal guidelines forbid him from accepting a job for a whole year. Oh, my winner. My UW Milwaukee Panthers, who against odds won their conference championship and will be headed to the Big Dance, a.k.a. NCAA tournament.
Michelle Litjens.
My winner is a devoted father in China whose son can't walk or bike, so the dad carries his 12-year-old son 5 miles to school, then walks a few miles to work, then walks back to pick up his son and carries him home again because he didn't want his son's disabilities to stop him from getting an education. My loser this week is the group Freedom from Religion. This week, the mayor of Green Bay invited Pope Francis to visit a shrine in the area. These losers are accusing